a couple of minutes, but very quickly, I'm just going to introduce some dignitaries that are in the room. First of all, we have the MLA. Your MLA from Kings North, John Lohr, right back there. And we have our newest MLA, elected in the by-election in 2018, Tori Rushton, sitting right over there from Cumberland South. And she's near and dear to my heart from Cumberland North, the MLA, Elizabeth Smith-McCrossan, right back there. And from deep down in Argyll, Barrington, MLA Chris D'Entremont. Where are you, Chris? Right back there. They got us surrounded. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not going to go to Ottawa alone in October. We have nominated candidates here in the room, other than your own, who we'll bring up here in a minute. We have Rick Perkins from South Shore St. Margaret's. Rick, where are you? Right over there. And with his legion of family and 15 children, Jason Cole from Dartmouth Cole Harbour. There he is right over there. Also in the room, someone that needs no introduction around this area, retired Senator Kelvin Ogilvie, and former Acadia University president. And a good friend of mine and of Rick Perkins, former member of Parliament, Peter McCreef, is in the room as well. Peter's right over here. Thank you, Peter, for coming all the way up. Right. Oh, don't worry, I'm going to get to you. Flipping the page, I'm going to get you, don't worry. Because you see, if you got in here on time, you would have been with the other ones. We have also the president of the King's Hands EDA, John Treitz, is here as well. John, thank you for hosting us in this great event. And the warden of West Hants, Abe Sabian, is here. Now, we also have other MLAs from Cape Breton, and you might have heard there's some things happening up in Cape Breton today. We lost another Liberal MP up in Cape Breton today, Mark Hiking. So you never know who's an MLA and who's an MP and what's going on. But with us today, all the way from Cape Breton, we have the great Alfie MacLeod from Sydney River, Lewisburg, and the Myra. And a fellow from up in Mark Iking's riding named Eddie Orrell, the MP from that area, Westmount. But we're not here to see all these wonderful people who have come down to join us here today. Why you're really here is to see your next MP and the next Conservative MP from King Hants, Martha McQuarrie, and the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada and the next Prime Minister of this great country, Andrew Scheer.
I like that sign.
Yeah, he's one of your biggest fans.
Thank you very much. All right. What a great crowd. What a great welcome.
We do it right here in Nova
That's
Scotia.
fantastic. This is great. Thank you very much for braving the weather today. We were talking this morning about the events for the day. We had some meetings in Halifax get canceled because the roads were very, very bad. And someone said, well, what about the event this evening in Windsor? And the feedback was, if you canceled an event in February in Canada just because of a little bit of snow, you'll never be able to come back and show your face again. So, but thank you all of you. I know the roads are a little dicey out there. It means a lot to me and to Martha to have you here. So thanks very much for coming out. Excited to answer your questions, to talk a little bit about what we're dealing with in Ottawa over the last few days. It was I was
Has there
thinking
been
about,
anything?
well, you know, you might have noticed a few things in the news a little bit, but you know, there's some very serious allegations coming out of Ottawa over the last few days. Allegations of interference in an independent criminal investigation with a very, very high-profile case of corruption. And of course, for the past few days, Justin Trudeau doing nothing to shed any light on it, not allowing his members on committee. Today we found out the Justice Committee in the House of Commons was seized with this issue. We were hoping that they were going to support our motion to allow witnesses to come to committee, principal people involved in this scandal. Unfortunately, they voted down that motion. So we can talk about that in a little bit. But of course, we're here to talk about the Conservatives' approach to Atlantic Canada, to some of the issues we've been talking about. Martha, I know you've been nominated for a little while now. What are you hearing at the doors? What are you hearing as you go out into the community as some of the big issues that people are talking about?
Well, I really started on the doorsteps probably back in August. And so at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of interest in an election in October of 2019. But there was a lot of disappointment in the Liberal government, that's for sure. And they were interested in having a change come this way. And in the last few weeks, the last couple of months, it's been amped up even more.
Mm-hmm. I had the pleasure of meeting with Tim Houston, the leader of the provincial PC party this morning, and actually this afternoon, and members of his caucus. They provided a wonderful lunch. We had donnerons and some pop, so that was fantastic.
The boys from away love their donnerons.
Well, usually we end up at Pizza Corner in the evening and do some damage at the end of the night, but this is great. No, but we talked about some very, very important issues. I've got the sense in the last few times that I've been through Atlantic Canada in Nova Scotia, there's a real opportunity for the Conservative Party to connect. We've got some great candidates. I know Scott already introduced them to the people here tonight. And one of the themes I've heard often is that the Liberals might have gone 32 for 32 in the last election, but that since then, the people of Atlantic Canada have gone 0 for 32. When you look at issues like the West to East pipeline, Energy East, bringing Western Canadian energy into Eastern markets, displacing foreign oil and giving people in this area an opportunity to have jobs in the resource sector. The fact that the minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency comes from not Newfoundland, not PEI, not Nova Scotia, not New Brunswick, but Mississauga, Brampton. That's certainly not respectful of the people of Atlantic Canada. And time again, it just seems like the issues of Atlantic Canada, whether it's fisheries, whether it's scandals in terms of special contracts to relatives of the minister, that the people here have had their vote taken for granted. So I'm happy to talk about any issue tonight, but I just want everyone to understand that we're here to develop some policies that will resonate with the people of Atlantic Canada. I had an Atlantic Forum yesterday in Fredericton. We had delegates from all over the region talking about everything from energy development to infrastructure to challenges with an aging population and some of the pressure that puts on rural communities when it comes to healthcare. So happy to talk about any of those issues here tonight. Before we get to questions, though, Martha, I know that you were talking about your family's history in small businesses, and you mentioned that your family business goes back to the 1920s even, I think you mentioned. 1920.
My grandfather came home from World War I and started a small drugstore in Truro, Nova Scotia.
Wow.
Still going strong now.
That's fantastic. The small business issue has been huge all over the country, but in Atlantic Canada, in Nova Scotia, small businesses really are the backbone of our economy. Yeah. And we saw the attack by the Liberal government calling small business owners, entrepreneurs, tax cheats. Have people here, gotten over that attack on the entrepreneurial sector, on the types of people that create? Okay, you didn't have to answer.
Absolutely not. Before you came in, I was speaking with Scott Geddes, who's here tonight. He's a local business owner. There he is. Local business owner, has a great restaurant down the road called Coco Pesto, and with the changes in the income tax, being called a tax cheat by this Liberal government has really upset him a great deal. It upsets me to think that my grandfather would be considered a tax cheat, or my father would be considered a tax cheat. And then you throw in a carbon tax on top of that. Scott, he says, how do we survive in a restaurant? Mm-hmm. How do local businesses survive?
Yeah, the margins in many of these small businesses, they're very competitive, and when governments take away their ability to save and to help expand, the reason why I get so passionate about this is because it's not, obviously we respect the risks that small business owners take, the entrepreneurial spirit, but it's all about the jobs and opportunity that are created because of that. I got my start in life because of a small business owner. My parents let me live for free at home during my years in university. They didn't charge me room and board, and they even bought me a bus pass. That was their contribution to my post-secondary education, and I'm grateful for it. So I went out and I waited tables. There was this restaurant that I got a job at, and because of that risk that restaurant owner took, I was able to have a job that paid my tuition. I benefited from that risk, and when that business did well, I did well. When I moved to Saskatchewan, I got a job in the insurance sector. Didn't have any training, didn't have any accreditation, but a husband and wife had sold the family farm, and they hired me, they trained me. I benefited because of that risk, because of that investment. So when we were fighting back against the small business tax hikes, yes, of course it was to respect the hard work and dedication that small business owners had for their community, but it was also to protect the jobs and opportunity of the millions of Canadians that are able to pay their mortgage, that are able to support their family, thanks to small businesses. And our commitment to the people of Canada, the people of Atlantic Canada, people in Nova Scotia is we will undo the damage that the Liberal government did to our small business and entrepreneurial sector. So I know we have some moderators. Why don't we get right to questions? I know we, I want to get to your questions. I want to hear what you want to talk about. I do have a flight that I'm hoping takes off from from Halifax later on tonight. So I want to get right to the opportunity to give you the floor. So why don't we hand it over, Scott, right away?
Okay. I hope you all are going to be participating in this quite vehemently. It's a great chance to ask the next Prime Minister questions now, so you can get them on the platform coming up here. We have two people going to be going through the crowd, candidate Rick Perkins and candidate Jason Cole. They're nominated from their ridings. They're going to be having these mics that, like I have in my hand here. If you have a question, just put your hand up. One of them will be over, stand up. Don't make a 10-minute statement, because we want to get as many people the opportunity to participate as possible. Ask a question, and Andrew Scheer will gladly answer your question, and I'm sure there'll be a few questions about the PMO tonight.
All right.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Warren Oss, retired Karcha. To me, national security is the most important thing in the country, because it sets the stage for everything else to happen. If your country's not secure, nothing will be secure within the country. I have two questions, if that's all right. And the first one is pretty straightforward, is will your government, if elected, implement the 2% of GDP spending on defense?
So I have made that commitment that is the goal, that over time to achieve that 2%. For too long, a lot of times it's been the military that bears the brunt of cuts, and when Liberals are in power, we see that they don't give our men and women in the armed forces the tools they need. We were supposed to have brand new, world-class, cutting-edge technology fighter jets to support the men and women in the armed forces. Our CF-18 fleet is aging, it's 40 years old, and because the Liberals have played politics with that procurement, they pressed reset in the whole process, costing taxpayers and delaying the delivery of that much-needed equipment. We are now in a situation where our government has replaced 40-year-old CF-18s, Canadian F-18s, with 40-year-old Australian F-18s. That makes no sense to me at all. So yes, the commitment is, we form government, we start to get control over government spending while making those investments in military procurement, upgrading of equipment, so that we can match what our NATO allies have had as their targets as well.
Thank you. And the second question is a little more complicated. I spent my time between regular force and reserves. The reserves are supposed to be our depth to our defense. I can speak specifically towards the militia, So that's what I was in, and that is the largest portion of our reserve. I spent time in many units almost across the whole country and in provinces where I didn't live and didn't spend time. I met a lot of people from the reserves there. And basically, it's generally the same. You'll get a lot of talk from the senior officers all the way down about how well everything is going. I dealt at the lower levels. I dealt at the platoon level. Wherever I went, I was usually a platoon second in command. It is a fact in all the units I was in, and probably across the country, that no single unit can produce more than a section of 8 men that are effective. Quite simply, I believe it's because there are no terms of service for the reserves. You can walk in, go through the whole recruiting process, have all the money spent on you doing that, walk in to be sworn in by the commanding officer. As soon as that happens, you can say, I want to be released. There is no effort from the commanding officers, when they do have personnel there, for them to attend, even though they are required by law to attend. You have people that play a game. There's a thing called non-effective. If you haven't paraded in reserves for 30 days, you become non-effective, and they start a process to release you. People play that game, and they show up once every 30 days. And at the lower levels, we have to deal with that person. There's really nothing we can do with them. They are effectively not effective. The training has not been kept up, and they're just a burden. The reserves needs a commitment from the government to implement, not to implement, but implement the terms of service and enforce the regulations when the person makes a decision to join, that they parade when ordered according to regulations.
Okay. Thanks for raising this. I'll take this as more of feedback than perhaps a question. This is an aspect of the dynamic between reserves and regular forces and ongoing recruitment and maintaining that reserve forces that you certainly seem to be very familiar about. So let me take that back with me and add that to the mix of our policy discussion as we look at how best we can ensure that we've got the right levels of enlistment, both in regular forces and in the reserves. We're starting to hear stories, anecdotes, but also people with first-hand knowledge about the lack of capacity in our armed forces in particular, the lack of ability, people who have been signed up, who have been allocated a potential placement and then wait years for training to get the qualification they need to go on and fill those higher skilled positions within the forces. That's causing a lot of waste and a lot of inefficiencies. The problem you're highlighting with the kind of maintaining certain standards of activity within the reserve units is something I'll definitely take back with me and look at with my policy team and with my shadow ministers. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Esther Ullman. Thank you so much for being here and taking my question. I'm 14 years old and I live on a small Christmas tree farm here in the valley. This summer at the Conservative Convention, I noticed that you banned the rebel media. By banning any media, are you not doing exactly what the party stands for? The Rebel and a few other media outlets are the only source of frightening news provided to the Canadian people here in the East. Prime Minister Trudeau has set up a $595 million slush fund for Canada's few remaining private sector journalists, but only if he can trust them. Although most of the media stations are accepting this bribe, the Rebel isn't. These media stations are taking Trudeau's fund. If they're taking this funding, they're more than likely going to show favor to the Liberals. Largely why we have Justin Trudeau as a Prime Minister rather than our former awesome Prime Minister Harper is the media's putting their swing on stories or not reporting them at all. They're going to try to do this again and sway the next election. Would you please reconsider your approach on this topic and not ban or shun the Rebel or other small media stations who are working to report to the Canadian people the stories none of the other media want to cover?
Good. Thank you very much for the question, and I certainly congratulate you on being so engaged at 14 and having that kind of interest in not only political parties, but also the dynamic between how events are reported and how different media outlets cover things, and the accountability that goes on between media holding the government to account, and also sometimes different outlets holding each other and fact-checking different stories in a wide variety of ways. So we always have an open policy towards the events we hold. You know, we're having this event tonight. Anybody is free to come. There's no barrier to entry. There's no barrier to come and report, to video, to broadcast, to live stream, and that's something that we're going to continue to do. We certainly do have concerns about the ability for, or at least the fact that now with this Liberal government approach to funding the media, the way that they've structured it, the way that it has an effect on the dynamic, that the concerns around maintaining that independent and objective aspect of the media is essential. And Canadians need to have confidence in their public institutions. They need to have confidence in media outlets as well. So we've been we've been holding the government to account as to how they have structured it. And when you see the government, when you see Liberal ministers talk about, influencing reporting, when they talk about the need for government control of what's being broadcast on social media, on having greater government control on that type of thing or influence, while also putting a fund aside to benefit the ideas for the media to benefit from, there are certainly concerns around making sure that the media is always viewed as independent and objective and not dependent on government funds. So my approach is different. I believe that both journalists and Canadians would prefer to see a market-based solution to ensure that our media is able to adapt to the realities of the 21st century, ensuring that content creators, journalists who write stories, investigative reporters, opinion leaders have the ability to benefit from the work they do. Right now, with the current government's approach, there are many platforms that benefit from that. You know, Facebook, Google, Twitter. They share the content that Canadian journalists have created, but the Canadian journalists, the people who wrote it, don't benefit from that. And so we're looking at what other countries have done, what other states who are facing this challenge have done to make sure that the primary beneficiary of that content is the person who actually created it. And that way, the free market will work. The people who write stories that are interesting to Canadians, the people that write stories that Canadians can trust, will have more clicks and more eyeballs on their story. And that's a better system than having the government, decide which is a proper outlet and which isn't. So we're going to continue to hold the government to account for that and take steps to make sure that Canadian media outlets, Canadian publications are able to compete and to thrive in this new economy that we're facing. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. First, thanks for coming to meet with us when even garbage collection was canceled today. My name's Rick Young, and I just wanted to ask you, as a former federal civil servant who spent over 3 decades working for Her Majesty, something that has been promised by countless governments for many years that never seems to take place is effective, impartial whistleblower legislation, so that a person can report wrongdoing without committing career suicide. I just want to know if your government will commit to that. And second, very quickly, I'm just wondering what plans you have to basically counter Maxime Bernier's attempts to split the vote on the right. Thank you very much.
Easy answer on the first one. We always are interested in protecting and enhancing the regime around whistleblowing. This is a very significant week to be talking about whistleblowing and those who are shining a light on improper activity in government. Often, it was our government that brought in the Federal Accountability Act in 2006. It was the first piece of legislation. It was in the aftermath of the sponsorship scandal, where there were civil servants who feared reprisal for shining a light on what happened in that scandal. We see now with the Mark Norman affair, where a very highly respected member of our armed forces is being prosecuted with, again, serious allegations of interference by government officials in Justin Trudeau Prime Minister's office. So I think now more than ever, I think it is time to say, okay, are the safeguards that were put in place by a previous Conservative government adequate? Should they be enhanced? Because there certainly is a feeling I sense in Ottawa these days that that there is, again, a fear of bringing some of these things to light. So yes, on that, always committed to improving that regime, because I think that's essential that that government is held to account, not just by other political parties, not just by the media, but also by those who are tasked to carry out orders on behalf of ministers and officials in the Prime Minister's office. You know, in terms of splitting the vote, you know, it was a key theme of my leadership campaign to keep all Conservatives united on the common ground that we all have, and take that positive Conservative vision that we all know we have. You know, we all, as Conservatives, we talk about improving the lives of Canadians. We talk about lifting people out of poverty, making sure our environment is clean, that we make the proper investments, and focusing on the types of things that unite Canadians in general. It's no secret that one person wanted to go it on their own. That's fine, as you know, in terms of that decision. It's his right to do that. But for those Canadians who are frustrated with Justin Trudeau, who care about things like greater individual liberty, secure border policy that prioritizes those coming to Canada properly, that our system prioritizes refugees in places of persecution and civil war coming to Canada through the proper channels, who are looking for a government that's going to rein in out of control government spending, bring us back to balanced budgets, lower the tax burden on Canadians. It is the Conservative Party that is not just talking about those issues, but fighting for those issues and winning Canadians over. So I'm quite confident that those individuals who may be looking at that will see that it's our party that actually has a track record of being authentic on those issues, and has the ability to win the next election and make sure that Justin Trudeau is a one-term Prime Minister. So that's my message to Conservatives across the country.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Mr. Scheer. My name is Wayne Galley, and I'm the provincial coordinator here in Nova Scotia for the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. Mr. Scheer, can you tell the crowd how a Conservative government plans to deal with the illegal use of firearms here in Canada?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we're going to focus on illegal firearms, not law-abiding firearms owners. That's the starting point. You know, I've never known an example where a drug dealer who is going to drive from one part of a city to another carrying a illegally trafficked firearm on his person call into the RCMP to make sure that they have the proper paperwork for that endeavor. It's lazy government to ask law-abiding Canadians to follow more laws. That's easy. You know, you're in the firearms community. I know that if the government passes a new regulation or a new law, you'll follow that law, because that is what the legal firearms owners across the country have done. They're very focused on safety and on education and making sure that people promote responsible use of firearms. It's much harder to get illegal guns off the street. It's much harder to get dangerous criminals off the street. It's much harder to make sure that gang members are held fully to account for the crimes that they commit. But that is what Conservatives are focused on. We're going to actually do the tough work, not the symbolic gestures that don't actually improve public safety in this country. And we know that right now the Liberals are contemplating certain types of bans on different kinds of firearms. That is going to divert precious police resources away from going after the real criminals, away from going after the dangerous gang members, and spending that time, that effort, and the resources, the money, going after people who have promoted the responsible use of firearms. So I've unveiled a comprehensive plan. It's quite detailed. I invite you to check it out on the Conservative Party website. But basically, it's focused on a few different things. One is reform of our criminal justice system to make sure that everything from our bail procedures to our abilities for Crown prosecutors to get convictions are streamlined to cut back on the resources necessary to do that. Also, tougher penalties for those who use firearms in the commission of offences, and greater resources to our border service agents to track and crack down on illegal firearms coming into Canada. That is time and energy and effort that will actually pay dividends in creating safer communities, not going after people like yourself who have, and groups who have long histories of complying with any law the government imposes on them.
Good evening, Mr. Scheer. I'm like the gentleman over across the hall there. He's worked for the civil servant for 30 years. I went 36 and a half years at 14 Wing Greenwood, and I'm telling you, it's an absolutely disgrace of the government ways within D&D, a disgrace. And the other thing I heard for 36 and a half years, we got money coming about the middle of February or about March that we've got to spend. If we don't spend it, we don't get it back next year. Well, there's something wrong with that picture. I've seen that for 36 and a half years. And the government waste is disgraceful. When you see 500 or 600 cadets in there with Nike sneakers on, and they take them to a shredder when they're done, there's something wrong with that picture. And I could talk forever about government waste, and I'm sure the guy across the hall could do the same. So please, don't let the money fall out of the sky in the middle of February, the first part of March, and say if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. And please cut that government waste, whether it's sneakers or T-shirts or jackets or hats or boots. The list goes on. I could talk here all night about the government waste. It's disgrace.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So I would love to hear examples of that. So maybe after the meeting here, we can connect, because this is exactly what these are the types of things that we can do to put an end to wasteful spending. What you're referring to in Ottawa is called March Madness. And that's when we see time and time again that departments that have perhaps not spent all the money allocated for them go and spend it for the sake of spending it. That's not actually getting a real return for Canadians. It's not actually fulfilling their mandate. It's just that they know that if there's money left on the table, they might lose it next year. That's not respectful to you as taxpayers. It's not respectful for the services that they're tasked with providing. There's a story just recently about the G7 in Charlevoix, Quebec, where the government went out and bought brand new vehicles for a few days worth of a conference, and then sold them at a loss afterwards, because once it's not new, the depreciation kicks in. So there's so many examples. Every time we ask questions in the House of Commons on an issue, the most common answer back from a Liberal minister is to brag about how much more money they're spending. That's their only proof point to taking an issue seriously. Well, they've increased spending. They've increased spending. They've increased spending. Well, Canadians don't want a more expensive government. They want a more effective government and a more efficient government. That's what Conservatives want.
Mr. Scheer, my name is Dan Boyd, and I live here in Windsor. I just want to ask you a very quick question about the level of rot that's seeping through the Liberal administration right now. Do you feel the comments made by the former Attorney General's father last night, and the fact that she's gone out and hired a former Supreme Court justice, has only exemplified the level of rot that is showing in Ottawa?
Look, these are very concerning times right now. These allegations are very, very serious, because they speak to the independence of our criminal proceedings, the independence of institutions like the Director of Public Prosecution, and indeed the independent nature of the Attorney General. Obviously, there's another side to this story. For the past few days, Justin Trudeau has had a different message. He started off by saying these allegations are completely false, nothing untoward's ever happened. That has shifted into saying things like the fact that Miss Jody Wilson-Raybould is still in his cabinet speaks for itself, and then the next day she's resigned. And then he started attacking her, but still not letting her speak. holding on to this idea that he won't waive privilege in terms of the attorney-client privilege that she may or may not feel bound by. So she's seeking legal counsel. This, when you look in the context of previous ethics violations, I'm sorry if I don't take Justin Trudeau at his word on this one. He told us that there's nothing wrong with his illegal vacation. The Mark Norman affair, the more and more allegations coming out in court that there's interference by the Prime Minister's office. So this is very, very concerning for Canadians, because we have to have confidence in our justice system. We live in the country that's been blessed by this wonderful democratic institution that we've inherited, the separation of powers between the judicial, the legislative, the executive, the fact that that we are a rule of law country where everyone has the same access to the justice system, and to think that there are people who might have the right government lobbyists that can get a special deal and subvert that, and that you'd have this type of pressure and influence put on an Attorney General when the Prime Minister didn't get the answer he liked, or when officials in his office didn't get the answers he liked, is very, very concerning. And I'm very disappointed. Today we had, just before I arrived, the Justice Committee of the House of Commons had an opportunity to start an investigation on this. We had a number of witnesses that included the Prime Minister's key figures in his office. They deleted all of that. They've kept it very, very limited, and they've even passed a motion that would have these discussions occur in camera, behind closed doors, without any public scrutiny. So that should speak for itself. We're going to continue to hold them to account. We understand there's some issues provincially here as well with the provincial Liberal government, with Information Commissioner, current PC party provincially. Martha, you know about that too in the provincial context. There seems to be
a whole issue with transparency, and I thought I remembered that this was what both Liberal governments ran on, was being the most transparent governments we've ever seen, and we can ask any of our MLAs here today. We get they ask for FOIPOP information, and it comes back with maybe one line, and the rest of it is all blacked out. So yeah. I don't see that as being very transparent. Not at all. So our position is we need to hear from Miss Jody Wilson-Raybould. We need to hear her side of the story. Justin Trudeau should stop speaking for her and allow her to speak for herself. Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Paul Burgess. My question to you is, very shortly, your party will be coming up with your platform for the upcoming election. Your list of promises to the people of Canada for what you will do once you're in office. Are you willing, within, say, 6 months to a year after the election, if you do become the ruling party, to go back and visit that platform and go over all the items on the platform and either explain what you've done to fulfill those items or what you're going to be doing to fulfill those items? And not just once the election's over, toss the platform out and say, we don't need that anymore.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's critical. When people vote for a party based on a platform, to me, that's an agreement. That's a political party, that's a leader, that's a prime minister, members of parliament carrying the banner in different ridings saying, if you give me your vote, I will do this on your behalf. I will fight for the things I've told you I believe in, and I will deliver the types of services that I believe are necessary to make life more affordable, to improve the quality of living for Canadians. And it's essential that we're held to account on that. So absolutely, I'll tell you a little story. Several times over the past few years, we've had issues in the House of Commons, whether it's the fact that this was the year that the budget was supposed to be balanced. Sorry, this was the year that the budget was supposed to balance itself. And in fact, that hasn't happened. When we've talked about transparency issues and corruption issues, we've tried to table the Liberal election platform in the House of Commons, just to remind them of what they campaign on. And they won't let us do it. It requires unanimous consent to do that, and they always say no, because their own campaign platform is embarrassing to them. Well, I will be proud to not only run on my election campaign, but to be reminded of the promises I make in that every single day that I am Prime Minister of this country.
Hi, Mr. Scheer. Ed Kellner. I live here in the local area, and I'm president of the local Progressive Conservative EDA. My question is simply this. The Liberals rolled back a lot of tax credits, whether it be for the young at school or for the elderly when it came to income splitting. Is your party intending to restore or reinstate some of these tax credits for Canadians?
We are absolutely intending on lowering the tax burden for Canadian families, for hardworking Canadians, for seniors, for every type of Canadian. We are going to make some of those announcements during the election campaign. We've already started to announce some of them. You talked about some of these tax credits that many Canadian families benefited from. We were asking the Prime Minister questions in the House of Commons just last week, and we were talking about the fact that there were families who benefited from the children fitness tax credit. There are people who benefited from the public transit tax credit. We talked about various things that were available for seniors, and Justin Trudeau's answer was that low-income Canadians don't benefit from tax breaks because low-income Canadians don't pay taxes. That was one of the most arrogant, out-of-touch messages I've ever heard him say. It speaks to the fact that he clearly has no understanding what the challenges that hardworking Canadians face every single day. Obviously, lots of low-income Canadians take the bus. Obviously, lots of low-income Canadians have kids in school or are in schools themselves. There are lots of low-income Canadians who have kids in activities. So absolutely, this is going to be a key part of our campaign, is helping people get ahead, helping families get ahead, helping individuals get ahead, helping seniors get ahead as well. There's this sense in this country right now, because of the increased tax burden, half of Canadian families report saying that they are only $200 away from not making it to the end of the month. The average middle-class family is paying over almost $900 a year in taxes, more in taxes today than they were when the Liberals took office. So we are absolutely going to be lowering the tax burden on Canadians and talking about affordability issues, making life more affordable for Canadians in every single region. So stay tuned, because we're going to have a lot to say during the election campaign on that.
Hi, it's Eric Meisner. I have a question regarding the Atlantic State terrorist groups and so on over in Syria and neighboring countries. Now, many of these are Canadians, and many of them right now want to come home. I know what Trudeau is doing with them, and please don't tell me you're going to give them all $10 million, but I just wonder, they are Canadian citizens. How are the Conservatives going to handle these people that want to come back to Canada? Thank you.
This is very... This is obviously a very important issue and a very concerning issue. Public safety, keeping Canadians safe, is one of the primordial roles of government. So it's one of the highest priorities for any government, at least it should be. You mentioned the $10.5 million payout to Omar Khadr. Never let anyone forget that that was a choice that Justin Trudeau had to make. There was no court order saying that he had to do it. There was no judge's ruling saying that he had to do it. He's very good at this. He's always blaming other people for his own mistakes. He's always saying it's not his fault, that he was forced to do that. When he realizes that Canadians don't support what he's done, he immediately tries to blame somebody else. Yesterday, we saw he's blaming Jody Wilson-Raybould for this ethics scandal. He blamed a court ruling that doesn't exist for paying Omar Khadr out $10.5 million. We know that there are at least 60 people who have fought for ISIS who are back in Canada, walking the streets safely. We've brought this up multiple times in the House of Commons. So far, the Liberal government has proposed absolutely nothing in terms of changes to legislation or changes to statute that would allow, make it easier for Canadian prosecutors to prosecute them, make it easier for them to be held accountable for the crimes that they've committed in other countries. We believe that there are things that we can do to strengthen our national security agencies, tools that we can put on the, legislation that we can put on the books that will give our Canadian authorities the ability to hold them to account for the crimes that they commit. But I'm very concerned when you hear stories about, we had this case with a person that was being held in the area, in the Syrian area, having fought for ISIS, having been captured by those forces opposing ISIS, and Canadian diplomatic officials were reaching out to talk about how we can bring how the government can bring that person back. Well, I can tell you it will never be a priority for my government to bring people who have fought for ISIS back to
Canada. Good afternoon, Mr. Scheer, and welcome to Nova Scotia. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm from New-Minas, and my question concerns international relations. But first, I wanted to commend you for your decisiveness, because a few weeks ago, when former Ambassador McCullum made his extemporaneous remarks to media, you were the first and really one of the only individuals to call for his dismissal immediately. And I thought that that took a lot of courage. I guess on that vein, though, what would our relationship with China look like under an Andrew Scheer government?
Well, it's quite clear that we're in a very difficult situation with foreign relations around the world in general, and specifically with China. We have this very tense situation where Canadians are being held in China. There are reports that they are not being treated well. And at the same time, we have this high-profile case with an executive at Huawei who's being held and facing extradition. Knowing that the stakes are so high on this, knowing that Canadians' safety in China is at stake is why I immediately called for John McCallum to be fired, because it's so irresponsible to have someone start giving a briefing to a very select group of media outlets, weighing in on the politics that were surrounding this issue. We are a country built on the rule of law. We have to always preserve that. We always have to take great steps to ensure that Canadians can have confidence in that, and that other countries understand that while they may have regimes and governments that use political tools to interfere in judicial proceedings, we don't. With China, obviously, China presents an opportunity for Canada in terms of economics. China is a source of investment in Canada and a market for many different types of goods that we make here, or agricultural products come to mind, obviously. But that being said, that we have to be as a country always defending Canada's interests and promoting Canada's fundamental principles that we believe in. So my approach to China, first of all, I believe we need a reset in terms of our relationship with China. They clearly don't respect Justin Trudeau anymore. Obviously, everything from his trip to India to the fact that he took so many concessions from Donald Trump, the fact that he's angered our traditional allies in Japan and Australia during trade negotiations, that we suffer from that as a country because of that loss of respect for our Prime Minister. So a reset is needed. Becoming Prime Minister, I think, would be a good start on that. And then having an approach to China where we look at everything on a case-by-case basis, looking at it through the lens of what's good for Canada, is this in the net national interest, and recognizing the fact that they have a much different system economically as well. There's so many state-owned enterprises in the Chinese economy. When Canadian companies compete with other companies around the world, we're happy to do so. It's part of how the free market works. But when you have a country where some of these countries are bankrolled by the government, where decisions they might make are not made based on market forces, but are based on political goals of the government, that's not the same playing field for Canadian companies. So we have to view this through a very careful lens. I certainly wouldn't have done what Trudeau did, which is go to China desperately seeking a free trade deal, when that's clearly not at this point in time in the best interests of Canadian workers, Canadian companies, and does not further Canada's strategic interests in the region.
Okay. He does have to catch a flight. He does want to be able to meet a couple before he goes tonight. So there'll be just two more questions. Go ahead, Rick.
Welcome, Mr. Scheer. I'm Barry Costello from Nouvelle-Écosse, just down the road. When Brian Mulroney took office, he said that Trudeau Sr. left him with 60-cent dollars. Do you have any idea what the son is going to leave you?
Well, he's going to leave me with a deficit of $30 billion. That's what he's leaving. And this is very frustrating. When we think about the legacy of debt that is being left to people entering the workforce today, young Canadians, but not just for future taxpayers. Current taxpayers are going to have to pay for these deficits. We have a window of opportunity this October. By replacing the Liberal government, we can avoid further tax increases. We know that as sure as night follows day, Liberal deficits mean Liberal tax hikes. He's already tried to raise taxes in several areas. We caught him. He tried to tax everything from employee benefits to benefits for military personnel to dental, health and other types of benefits in that regard. He's already raised taxes on families by canceling those tax credits we talked about, and of course the carbon tax being imposed on so many Canadians. So we have an opportunity this October. We can avoid those taxes by replacing this Liberal government, bringing in a Conservative government that will control the growth of government spending. That window is very short. We know what happens with out-of-control Liberal deficits. It's a movie we've all seen before. And you know, my generation, the people in this room, they're still paying off the debt from the first Trudeau's legacy in office. We want to limit the damage to what this government is doing for not just current taxpayers, but also future taxpayers as well.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Alfie McLeod, and I'm from downtown Cape Breton. I want to... First, I want to thank you for coming to rural Nova Scotia. Secondly, I want to say it's a great day to be a Tory when you're here.
Oh, thank you.
But really the question is, as you know, Atlantic Canada makes up about 10% of the population of Canada, yet we put more than 40% of the armed forces come from Atlantic Canada. My question to you is, what are we going to do when you become Prime Minister, which you will? What are we going to do for the modern day veterans as we move forward?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Elfie. And I just want to say publicly, I want to thank you, Elfie, for the great work you've done on this file. I know veterans are people, and it's an issue that is near and dear to your heart. And thank you for your legacy of work on their behalf. So thanks very much for
All right.
We saw in the last election campaign the Liberals using our veterans as props during campaign announcements. And then the second the election was over, once they had their votes, they forced them to go back to court to get what they had promised. So that ends under a Conservative government. We will absolutely come to an agreement, a deal that we will take, that veterans can take to the bank. We have to absolutely make sure that when someone enlists in the Canadian Forces, that what they're promised, the package of benefits that they know that will be there for them, as well as the types of provisions for things that may manifest themselves after the service is ended, has to be fully funded. They have to be there in an upfront way that they know exactly what they're getting with. And we have to look at some of the existing programs and say, is this adequate? Because as we learn more and more about things like post-traumatic stress disorder, as we see how mental health issues can come on later on in life, well after someone has completed their service, we have to make sure that we're responsive to the needs of those veterans. I continue to hear stories, and I know Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia has so many families that have served in the armed forces in one way or the other. But we talked about waste in government just a few seconds ago. I know people who have served in the armed forces that have permanent disabilities, permanent damage because of their service to Canada. And yet, time and time again, they have to reprove that they've got that permanent disability. They have to reprove that they've had that amputation. They have to reprove that they've got permanent hearing loss. That's ridiculous. And we have to streamline the bureaucratic nature of some of the services that are there for veterans so that the money goes to providing services, not just being spent on administration.
Okay, the last question back here.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much for coming. I'm an emerge doc, Dr. Levanos. I work in all over Nova Scotia, and I'm forced to see patients in hallways, in cloakrooms, and there's an increasing burden. This is a huge problem in Nova Scotia we're all aware of. I was just wondering, because I'm constantly hearing whispers of increasing privatization in Ontario, and given that the Canada Health Act has a mandate for universality, can you talk a little bit about your perspective on how you square that for some non-essential services or something like that?
Absolutely, and I think that universality, the principle that no Canadian should ever be turned away because they don't have an ability to pay, that is the fundamental pillar of our system. It's something that I think as all Canadians we're very proud of, and that is something that we will ensure, the Conservative government ensures that the federal government plays its role in making sure that happens. I've always believed that the key for provincial governments is to have stable funding, that they know that there aren't politics played around potential increases to federal transfers, that we have long-term agreements where provinces know for for multiple years what they're going to get. At the same time, we have to allow provincial governments to take care of how they will deliver those services. We don't want an Ottawa fits all, a one size Ottawa knows best approach to these things. There are unique challenges in Nova Scotia that are different than Ontario, different than Saskatchewan, different than British Columbia. I spoke today with Progressive Conservative Caucus, and one of the things that was brought up was the demographic change in Nova Scotia, meaning that more and more care is going to an aging population. That might be a different challenge than what we see in other parts of the country. So some flexibility into how provinces approach these things, I think, is important. And knowing that you can have different delivery models as long as that universality, as long as that fundamental principle to those ideals of everyone having access and no one being turned away for the inability to pay is a central part of that. So there are lots of examples where we've seen efficiencies and we've seen more money is there for services by allowing provinces to look at different things. We spoke today about how perhaps some of the different government programs could be adapted to help deal with things like palliative care, seniors' home care. So I very much want to continue my discussions with the provincial leaders of provincial governments to make sure that the federal government has that flexibility and is able to accommodate some of the different needs in our different regions in our country.
Leader, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for coming back to Nova Scotia. You've been here many, many times since you were elected leader. Thank you for coming to King's Hands. I want you all to remember this is the home of Pat Nallin and George Nallin, great Conservative MPs, and it's about time we had another one in Martha McQuarrie. And Leader, we're going to do everything we can to send multiple members of Parliament in Ottawa to help support you when you become Prime Minister in a strong Conservative majority government. We're going to be there for you, and we're going to welcome you back here many times between now and Election Day. Thank you for coming. We know you got to run to get to the airport, but he is going to shake a few hands on the way out. Thanks very much for coming, Andrew.